Welcome, and for turning out this evening. A little bit of a debate as to whether or not you were here to hear my lecture or for the food, but in any event, you're here now, so let's jump right in and talk about entrepreneurship a little bit. It's a subject that really isn't discussed a whole lot on campus, especially technical universities and colleges. But if anyone is interested in potentially someday starting and running your own company, especially in a tech field, hopefully something that I'll talk about tonight will be useful and helpful. And I plan to go through the slides relatively quickly so we have time for discussion afterward, because I think it's much more beneficial if I open the floor up to questions and we can have a real discussion. And as part of talking about the challenges of entrepreneurial space, I'm using my first company as sort of a case study. Sort of talk about the history, the challenges that we had, and also lessons that I learned through that process. And hopefully that will be useful and interesting to people. So to start, as was mentioned, I did graduate from IIT in 1996 with a degree in aerospace engineering, a bachelor's. Ended up going on to MIT for my master's in aeronautics and astronautics. And then went to work for a startup aerospace company right out of MIT, essentially. So I had pretty much decided early on that I wanted to work for an entrepreneurial firm. I saw the advantages of working in such a firm as opposed to a big aerospace company like Boeing or Lockheed, for that matter, in that I always believed that you could have more of an influence as an individual in a company that was small and more integrated as opposed to a big organization where you're just one cog in a very large wheel. So I always had my sights set on working in that space, but didn't think I would be actually starting my own company quite so quickly. As I mentioned, I left MIT in 1997 and went to work for a startup company that then went out of business 9 months later. So after 9 months out of school, I found myself trying to figure out what I was going to do, and what occurred to me was, why not start your own company? I didn't realize at the time, I think I was a little too naive and not experienced enough to know how challenging that would actually be, especially for an aerospace company as opposed to a software company or some other kind of tech startup. But we decided to throw in and give it a shot anyway. And so the place to start for this lecture is back at the beginning. And so when I found myself out of work, one of the individuals who I was working with at this aerospace company that went out of business ended up also wanting to start a company, so we started this together. So I had one partner. It was formed in 1999, and it was called the Space Launch Corporation. And I know that sounds like a very big name for such a small startup company, but we were thinking very big at that point. At the time, we thought the company we were working for that went out of business was actually a launch system developer. In the late 90s, there was a great deal of excitement about potential for the satellite market. There were a number of small startups that were working on launch systems, renewable launch systems, and we were working for one of them. And so launch systems is what we knew, propulsion and launch vehicles. So we figured this would be the best place to start. And we had our own ideas. We felt like we knew better how to start and run a company like this. And so this is what we did. We chose a market, which was the commercial small satellite market. It was a very hot potential market. There's a lot of excitement around potential for very small satellites. And we're talking about small now. We're talking about less than 200 kilograms, less than 400 pounds. And the commercial opportunities that those satellites would develop. So our idea was to develop a small satellite launcher dedicated for those kinds of payloads. And we created a business plan. We basically designed their initial system. We wanted to do something that was sort of not too risky, but use as much off-the-shelf technology as possible. So our initial concept was to actually use an existing aircraft, design a new small rocket, and launch that rocket from an aircraft. In this case, you can see a picture of the concept, which was basically a 3-stage solid rocket vehicle launched from an F-4 Phantom aircraft. And this is where we started. We spent 1 year attempting to raise funds. Again, we didn't know anything about raising money. We didn't know anything about running a business. We just threw in, created the business plan, and went out and started talking to people. And we spent, that year pitching to about 100 different angels and VC firms. And even though we didn't get any real interest in people investing in the business, what we did find was we got a lot of good feedback. So it wasn't a wasted effort. That year, even though we didn't get the money that we wanted, and again, we should have been more realistic. We're looking for $25 million for an aerospace startup that wanted to develop a launch system with 2 guys just 9 months out of school, essentially. But it was a really good experience going and talking to them. We got a lot of good feedback. We were able to sort of, at that point, to reshape our plans a little bit and start to think a little more realistically. So what became clear very quickly was the challenges involved with fundraising, especially for a high-risk venture with a return that the investor might not see for 5, 6 years down the road. This kind of business, especially a tech business, and specifically aerospace, has high capital requirements. You need a lot of money to do anything, really. It's high risk, and as I mentioned, it's a long break-even time. So the time between when you get your money and when you can pay back the investors is usually quite long. So investors really don't like that, especially at the time when there were a lot of investments being made in software, which the turnaround time would be maybe like a year or two. This is a hard sell. Also, a lot of uncertainty. At the time, the small satellite market, people had grand hopes for it. There was a lot of potential, but it really hadn't fully matured yet. And so there was a little bit of this chicken and egg situation where, small satellites, they could see the potential, but there was no launch system available to launch them inexpensively. So, the idea was if you build this launch system, then you'll generate more market. So you have to essentially sell the investor on the potential. This idea that if we just build this, all of a sudden we're going to have all kinds of customers, we're going to be able to make all kinds of money. That's also a very hard sell. As I mentioned, we didn't get any money, but we received a lot of compliments on our business plan and on our approach and on our pitch. People who met us, they liked us, they thought we knew what we were doing, they liked our enthusiasm, but it wasn't enough to actually start the business and make it successful. In the end, we ended up, because at the time this was our full-time gig. We didn't work part-time while we were doing this, so we were using our credit cards to pay off all our expenses, including our rent. So after a year, we ended up with $25,000 each in credit card debt. And we managed that by basically moving credit card balances from one new card to another with zero interest. So we were able to do that for about a year, but that trick ran out after about 12 or 13 months. So then we were faced with, what do we do now? We didn't want to go and get real jobs. So we were trying to sort of figure out what will be our next step. And this is where sometimes I think one of the most important things in the entrepreneurial world comes in is just luck. Just being in the right time at the right place. Never underestimate that, but you have to also recognize it when it crosses your path. For us, in early 2000, so this is, again, about a year after we started pitching, we pitched our business plan to an individual who had a company that was developing nanotechnology. And he was based in Southern California, where we were as well. And the reason we pitched him, we thought maybe he would invest in us, but he was also developing technology that could be used in launch systems, propellants and things like that. So we thought, we'll go pitch him. Maybe if he doesn't want to invest, we can do some sort of partnership, develop some new technology. We're really looking for anything that we can do to keep things moving and to find ways to bring in money for the company. And so we went and pitched this individual, and at the end of the day, he declined to invest in us, but he was so impressed with our pitch and our business plan and our enthusiasm that he hired us both right there on the spot. He said, listen, why don't you guys come and work for me? And considering we had $25,000 worth of debt on our credit card, we weren't really in a position to say no. So we took him up on his offer, and we had good salaries, and we went to work for him, working on space technology, mostly in propulsion, thinking, all right, we just need to keep our heads down, keep working, keep making contacts. At some point, maybe we can go back to what we want to go back to, but at this time, it was a long time for us. It really saved us in more ways than one. So in January 2000, we began working for this individual as chief scientist for his company doing tech development. Now what happened was this company now went out of business about a year after we got there. So you're seeing a trend here. It's hard when you're starting a company in any field. Tech fields are especially difficult. And nanotechnology was a really hot topic back then as well. And they were essentially trying to commercialize a process to make nano-aluminum particles. Their innovation was that they created a process where they could make very uniform, highly uniform powders of a single size. At that point, that really wasn't easy to do, not inexpensively anyway. But they mismanaged their company, they pissed off their investors, and they ran out of money. So a year after we started with them, we were finding ourselves in a position that we're back on our own again. What was good, though, was that after a year of working for them, we managed to pay off all our debt and have money in the bank. So we decided to go back into space launch and to give it another shot. So at this point, what we knew, though, is that we weren't going to go back and do the same thing we did before, because we knew that would end up in failure. So we needed a new strategy. And this is part of the process of starting a company as well. If what you're doing isn't working, you got to find a new way. You got to find a new strategy, a new approach, something that's different from what you did before. So for us, our new strategy was to look for government funding. We figured, we saw a lot of companies, a lot of individuals that were doing government contracts, a very lucrative area, lots of money coming out of the government, both at the state and federal level. we figured, why can't we do this as well? Again, we didn't know anything about government contracting or managing government contracts. So we started to educate ourselves, started to do research, started to talk to people who knew about this area, people who had experience running government contracts, bidding for government contracts. And so we slowly started to understand the process, and we submitted our first proposal for a state of California contract to do propulsion development, and we got it. It was $70,000, which doesn't sound like a whole lot, but for us at the time it meant a great deal. It was also just a foot in the door. We figured once we had one, then that could potentially open the door up for other contracts. So this became our new approach. So we got this first little grant from the state of California. We also managed to acquire a rocket test facility. The company that we worked for that went out of business, the previous one, the launch vehicle company, had a test site in Mojave, California, where they were testing propulsion systems and rockets. We figured if we're going to do government contract work and do propulsion development, that we should have a test site as well. Since the company was bankrupt, we made a deal with the owners to give us the test site in exchange for equity. So we didn't pay any cash, and we took over the facility. That's a picture of it right there. So this was all part of our plan to sort of build up our infrastructure, to build up something that we looked real to the people we were bidding on the contracts for. And it started to work. We started to get noticed a little bit. We also realized that if we were going to do this, we needed to go from the state of California to the federal level. We needed, money from either Department of Defense or NASA, someone with budgets that could actually fund the things that we wanted to do. Our goal was to find a program that was doing technology that was, I would say, sort of synergistic with what we wanted to do as a commercial business. So if we wanted to do a small launch vehicle, we wanted to find contracts, government programs that were developing technology that would be useful for us, so it was mutually beneficial. So we started to work to investigate the potential of doing work with DARPA. I don't know if everyone knows DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They're essentially the R&D arm of the DoD, and they do really cutting-edge, advanced tech development. Everyone here probably knows who they are. They develop the internet, for instance, and quite a few other technologies that we take for granted today. But they also do a lot of investing in space technology. And at the time that we were starting to investigate DARPA, trying to get to know people at DARPA, we learned of a program that DARPA was starting to initiate that wanted to develop a low-cost, responsive, small launch vehicle. Exactly what we wanted to do. Now, what DARPA wanted to do was a bit more difficult than what we wanted to do, because DARPA doesn't do anything easy. If DARPA does anything, if they investigate any technology, they invest in any system, it's going to be leading edge stuff. It's not something that's off the shelf. So, we ended up eventually finding our angel, and this was a government angel. In early 2001, as part of our process of learning about DARPA and trying to meet people, I met a DARPA program manager. His name was Preston Carter. It was this individual who was starting this program. When he heard what we were trying to do, our backgrounds, our goals for our own company, he sort of became our mentor. He sort of saw us as two guys coming up that could use his help, that were trying to do things that he was trying to do. We already were developing technology that were beneficial for the programs that he wanted to do. So he saw the potential there, and we developed a very good relationship with him. He gave us recommendations what we should do as a company to make ourselves more attractive to the government as far as getting contracts. He was sort of grooming us to give us a contract, although we didn't know it at the time. And so basically he advised us on what to do to make ourselves more attractive to them, as I mentioned. And one of the things that he recommended that we hire someone who knows something about government contracting, someone who knows how to manage a government contract, someone who has experience doing that, because we didn't have that experience. And the government's not going to give you a contract if you have no experience prior with government contracts. They just won't take the risk. So we happened to know someone at the time who came out of the government, who had 20 years of experience managing government programs, and we hired her right there. We still didn't have any money, so we started paying her off our credit cards again. But this time was different. We realized that if we made this hire, there's a good chance we're going to get a contract, and we don't have to worry about going into serious debt again. So we guaranteed her that we paid her for at least 6 months off our credit cards and worked to get the government to give us a contract. Turns out that after we hired her, Preston Carter, the same individual, turned around and said, "You got your contract." And that was our first big government contract. That was a $1.5 billion contract to develop technology for his launch system. And that got us rolling. So all of a sudden now we're thinking, okay, we can do this. This sounds like something we can manage over time. The program that he was developing was this program. It's called RASCAL. And it was an acronym for Responsive Access Small Right, yes, so that's a small cargo affordable launch. The government does like their acronyms. And this was meant to be a tactical launch system, essentially. A responsive, low-cost launch system for payloads on the order of 100 kilograms. The idea being that the government needed to place, say, a remote sensing satellite over an enemy position on short notice. I mean, within 24 hours, this system could do it. So it's not just about the launch system, it's about the payload as well. So DARPA was looking at the whole ecosystem. The payloads, the launch systems, the operations, everything. And for us, this seemed like a godsend. I mean, this is exactly what we wanted to do. We wanted to do low-cost, small satellite launch. So we figured we have to play in this. And we were lucky to at least get this. We were already having a contract to develop a piece of the system. The piece we were working on, you can't really see it all that well, was a guidance and control pod at the top of the expendable rocket. It basically was the smarts of the rocket that guided this rocket into space and then managed the payload on orbit. That's what we were working on as a company. So just talk a little bit about Rascal so you have a better idea of what we were trying to accomplish. And again, for us, it was a dream from a launch system standpoint. We were developing, the program was going to develop cutting-edge propulsion, both air-breathing and rocket propulsion. It was going to also address the market that we wanted to address directly. The key technology for Rascal was something called MIPIC. So Rascal, I'll actually talk about this in the next slide a little bit. So just real quick, go back here. So Rascal was basically two key systems. It was a reusable aircraft and an expendable rocket. The aircraft itself was designed to be like a purpose-built new aircraft design with a new technology for the propulsion system. Normally, if you want to launch an expendable rocket, you want to do it at high speed and high altitude. So that reduces the size of the expendable rocket, thereby reducing the cost. The idea here is you want to drive down the recurrent cost by minimizing the amount of hardware you throw away with each launch. So the key for Rascal was to get the expendable rocket up to high speed and high altitude. How do you do that? I mean, you can put a rocket in the airplane and use rocket power to go up. Or you can use this technology which DARPA wanted to develop called MIPIC. It's mass injection pre-compressor cooling. And essentially what you're doing is, again, you want to get to sort of this point up here, staging Mach number around 3 at about 100,000 feet. So the idea was that you could do this with air-breathing propulsion if it was tweaked in just the right way. The concept here is that you would inject oxygen and water ahead of the compressor face of the engine, thereby tricking the engine into thinking it was operating at a lower speed and altitude condition. I'll talk a little bit more of that in just a moment. But that was the key technology. That was what Preston built the entire program around, was MIPIC, demonstrating that technology to allow low-cost launch. So these were the key technologies that were incorporated into Rascal, and this is what the program was going to develop. And so for us, it was something that we really needed to play in. We needed to be a part of this because if the technology was developed, we wanted to have access to it. So the other thing about this program, which I want to mention, which is useful for a new start company like ours, is that typically when you do government contracting, the government owns any technology that's developed outright. So they're putting in the money, they expect to have access to it, not just have access to it, but to actually own it and control the technology. What Preston decided to do for this specific contract, which made it even more attractive to us as a small business, is use a special contracting vehicle called other transaction authority. And what that means essentially is that it gives the company that's executing on the contract the ability to own the commercial rights to the technology. So the government gets government purpose rights. They can use it for whatever they want to use it for, and they can access that technology at any time. But the company that actually wins the contract can now use that in a commercial setting for anything they want, essentially. It's their specific right, and no one else can use it. Again, this was just something that was just too good to pass up. So, as I mentioned previously, this program represented for us a path to a commercial market, and it was something that we really wanted to play in more than just a bit player. We didn't want to just develop that guiding module. We wanted to do the whole thing. And again, it was good for us that we really were thinking about how silly that may have sounded to everyone, that a small company, at the time we had 9 employees, would want to bid on a government contract worth $90 million to develop a complete launch system. But luckily we didn't know any better. But we also knew that if we didn't give it a shot, that we would regret it. Because, again, this was our market, this was our business. So even though we were still big players, and at the time there were, I think, 6 or 7 companies that were going to bid on this program. And we were a subcontractor on at least 2 or 3 of those other companies' proposals. We decided to put in our own proposal, do our own thing. So we assembled a team and put together a proposal and submitted it to DARPA along with everybody else, thinking, why not? We'll just give it a shot. And not knowing what would not knowing what would happen, we weren't really expecting to get a contract, but we thought, if Preston respects us, maybe he'll go one step further and give us one of the contracts. Phase 1 of this program, they were going to award, I remember correctly, 6 contracts. So we figured, no, sorry, 5 teams were going to win. 5 contracts were going to be awarded. So we had no idea who was going to come out on top, but we submitted a proposal anyway and just sat back and waited to see what the results would be. And as I mentioned, no one gave us any real chance of winning a contract. I mean, everyone that was bidding on this, everyone knew everybody else. It was a very small community. Even the big companies like Boeing, we were a subcontractor to them as well. And so we asked them, listen, do you mind if we put in our own proposal? And they're like, no, go ahead. Why not? Have at it. They didn't think there's any chance that a company like us would even warrant a look at this. So everyone's like, okay, good, go ahead. Just make sure there's no conflict of interest. As it turned out, we came in 6th on the list. So we came in just 1 short of the number of proposals. So they awarded 5. They ranked them in order of what they considered to be most likely to give them what they wanted. We came in 6th. Missed it by just 1. Or did we? When Preston saw that we came in at number 6, and considering the work we've done with him up until now, and the fact that he respected us, and the fact that we put together just an amazing team. And part of what made our proposal attractive to DARPA was the fact that we chose to work on our aircraft as our key subcontractor with Scaled Composites. Anyone know who Scaled? Bert Moutan? They won the X Prize? Yeah. At the time, Bert was considered was then, and still is now, considered a legend in the industry. And one of the things that he was well known for, what Scaled was well known for, was developing rapid prototyping of new vehicles for very low cost. DARPA was worried about the budget on this program. It was only $90 million, which seems like when you think about it, not all that much to develop a complete launch system, especially when you're developing a completely new aircraft. So the idea that potentially working with Scaled could get them what they wanted on the budget they wanted to give us a shot to see if we could prove that we could do it. So Preston freed up more money and gave us one of the Phase 1 awards, which got us into the game, essentially. Everyone was, well, to say surprised is an understatement. But we were happy, we were shocked. We said, okay, now we have to actually start doing this now. And honestly, we weren't really prepared because, again, at the time we only had 9 employees and we were just, starting to figure out how to run a company with 9 people. Now we needed to ramp up to actually execute a major government program. Well, not yet. I mean, at this stage, we still needed to grow, but not as much as we might have to if we actually won the contract. But we actually executed Phase 1. We ramped up. We hired people we needed to hire. And DARPA was going to down select from 6 to 2 for Phase 2. And again, no one gave us much of a chance, but we put together what I would consider to be a very compelling proposal with Scaled. It was and this is the concept that we developed with Scaled. This is an image of it. And from everything that we were able to show DARPA, we believed that we could do this on their budget with minimal risk, given Scaled's experience and the history and the fact that they were still considered legends, even within the government. We felt our chances were pretty good of getting one of the 2 awards for Phase 2. Although, again, we were tempering down our expectations. And what ended up happening, Phase 2, by the way, was worth $22 million. So Phase 1, each award was about $1 million, roughly. Phase 2 was going to be $22 million, and that was going to get the program to PDR. And what ended up happening was, instead of selecting 2 for Phase 2, which would have been 2 $10 million awards, they gave it all to us, the entire $22 million. Now, if Phase 1 was a shock, this was a real shock to us. Now, we had hoped, beyond hope, that we would get one of the Phase 2s, $10 million, not a bad deal for a small company. But now, Phase 2 is $22 million, and the reason they did this is they were so impressed with our proposal that they didn't want to waste time on splitting the pot. They just wanted to give all the money to us and see if we could drive this to ground, essentially. Basically, we execute this and get the program to where it needed to be. So, at this point, we're still a company of about 9 or 10 people, faced with a $22 million contract, managing a contractor team of about 10 different companies, both large and small. And Boeing was a subcontractor to us now, as opposed to us being a subcontractor to them. So everything was flipped upside down. And we scrambled. This was probably the most challenging aspect of what we were facing as a company. Because we had to go from, so once this all sunk in, celebrations were over, we realized we have to grow this company. We have to go from 9 to probably around 35 people. And we have to do it quickly, because the government wants to start executing. They want to start work. They don't want us to wait 6 months to build up the number of employees. And, oops, wait a minute. Sorry, here we go. So we realized we couldn't execute the program unless we made some really big changes. Part of that was hiring up the right staff. And again, we grew from 8 to 35 in about 3 months. We managed a contractor team, and there were a lot of growth pains. We made a lot of mistakes. Biggest ones that I can remember are, again, just hiring mistakes. We didn't know much about interviewing and about hiring when we first started this. I mean, when you're only needing to bring in a couple people, you can take your time, you can try to find the right people. You need specialists in certain areas, you get recommendations. We needed to grow quickly, and we needed a lot of people. So we hired people who turned out to not be very good at their jobs. One woman we hired to do accounting, turned out she didn't know how to do accounting. So we had to let her go like 2 days later. Just things like this. So, we brought in help, we brought in experts to sort of teach us how to do an interview, how to read a resume. What are you looking for? What do you ask? What are the questions you need to ask? And we got much better at it. So it was a very difficult time. It was very stressful. But we learned quickly, and we were able to grow the company to the size we needed to manage the contract. So things are starting to move. We're starting to execute the contract, and things are starting to feel like we got a handle on what's going on here. And just when you think things are going well and you got the handle on everything, something always tends to come in and muck up the works. As I mentioned before, we did have some trouble with the interview process. We did have trouble hiring the wrong people. If you hire a low-level person and you make a mistake, it's not that big a deal. You realize it really quickly, they're gone the next day, and you bring in somebody else. If you do that at a higher level, it becomes much more problematic. And we made a mistake. We brought in a program manager because the government was a little concerned, even with the people that we've hired, that we didn't have the experience to manage this big of a government program. So they felt more comfortable. We brought in someone with a great deal of experience. So we hired a program manager who used to be a program manager at Lockheed Martin, a guy really well known, respected at DARPA, and so we brought him in and basically put him in charge of the program. I think the mistake we made was, we underestimated the ability to bring in someone who spent most of his career working for a big aerospace company at a very high level. And what we needed was someone who was not just going to be a program manager and just sort of tell people what to do, but was going to get their hands dirty, really work on the program, really get in there with the team and manage this at a lower level, not just at the 20,000-foot view. He was good at managing the relationship with the customer, but he didn't know how to actually manage the team. This was a real problem for us. We didn't have enough money to hire multiple layers of management. We just needed someone who could do both. And this guy wasn't it. And we learned it within the first 2 or 3 weeks of actually after having him in the job. Because things weren't getting done, things were getting missed. The team wasn't executing properly. And so what ended up happening was, this individual went and met Preston Carter, who's the program manager. They hit it off really well, became really close. So now our problem is even more acute. He can't stay, but now the customer has met him, and he likes him. At the end of the day, we realized we have no choice, we have to let him go. And that's what we did. And our government customer was not happy about that at all. As a matter of fact, he was extremely angry. He summoned myself and my partner he was at the time in San Francisco, we were in LA, he's like, you have to fly up here and meet me right now. I went and saw him. He basically was screaming at us and yelling at us, how could you do this? Who do you guys think you are? Type of thing. It's a little scary. And then we realized how big of a hole we dug for ourselves. And again, this is part of the process of learning not just how to run a company, but the politics of government contracting. And when you make a bad hire, what you need to do, how you need to handle it. Okay, so we're learning as we're going here, but we realized we had a big problem at this point. So the relationship with DARPA was damaged pretty badly. And Preston Carter was himself very angry, and we had 2 or 3 months of just really a lot of tension. Every meeting was adversarial. We weren't really making good progress. At the end of the day, Preston actually threatened to have the contract revoked. He was going to pull it away from us. He threatened to take it away. And eventually, word of this got up to the director of DARPA, a man named Tony Tether, who ran the whole organization. And when he heard what was going on, he decided to step in. Preston, in the course of this, had overstepped a bunch of bounds by threatening us, by saying he's going to take away the contract, basically being heavy-handed. So Tony Tether actually removed Preston Carter as the program manager for the program. So now we're a program without a program manager. He eventually put someone back into the role, but at this point, we're in a dysfunctional relationship with the government. So our challenge now was to rebuild a level of trust with them. And this was, again, as we're trying to execute the contract, we're trying to make progress on all the design efforts. Again, you saw the program. We were trying to develop a new aircraft, we're developing a new rocket vehicle, we're developing new concept of operations. All this is happening. We're making progress, we're doing work while we're dealing with this at the same time. And we couldn't really believe what was happening, but we had to do it anyway. So we've spent a lot of time trying to rebuild that relationship. So we learned, it was a good learning experience for us, what we needed to do to rebuild that trust. How do we need to approach this problem with the government? How do we need to behave and act now to make sure that this doesn't happen again? And this is what we spent the better part of half a year trying to do in 2003. But it worked. It took us some time, but after a very I would say a meeting with Tony Tether and the other key principals, we met in a room, we hashed it out until everyone was happy, and we started to rebuild that trust. We were able to actually convince Tony Tether himself that we were still in a position to execute the contract. At this point, he was concerned, but willing to give us the benefit of the doubt. He came to us, to our headquarters. We met with him. We presented the work we had done up until that point. Our CTO at the time, brilliant individual, who actually was sort of the key person driving the technology development for us, presented the concepts, the work we had done, along with scale composites, and he blew them away. So at the end of the day, good work still can save you, but you have to do good work. You can't do what we did and not do good work and expect to survive. So that gave us an opening. That gave us a chance to continue. And this is what we did. At the end of that meeting, where we presented the concept to him, our status, the accumulation of work we'd done up to that point, he was very impressed. And at that point, he was like, okay, guys, I like what you're doing. Let's keep going and see where this leads us. So that got us into the program. We started to focus now on the programmatics and the technologies, and it became, again, the challenge now moved from the political sphere and the administrative sphere to the technical sphere, which is where you sort of expect it to be anyway. Because when you start a program like this, you never really think it's going to end up looking exactly like you expected when you started. When this thing first started, DARPA envisioned an aircraft that was a new aircraft with MIPIC that was the size of an F-15, like a fighter aircraft. But as we started to get into the research, started doing testing, we were doing a lot of hardware testing as well, both for the rocket and for the air-breathing propulsion. MIPIC especially, we were doing a lot of testing because no one really fully understood how this was going to work. We started to realize that the aircraft needed to be a lot bigger than what DARPA originally envisioned. And you can see here sort of the progression of aircraft size. So this is where, at the top A is where we started at the end of phase 1. And as we started to progress and understand more about MIPIC, we realized for MIPIC, the inlets needed to be a lot longer than what the government expected. So when you're injecting water and oxygen at high speed, you need to have more length to allow for those liquids to evaporate before they hit the compressor phase. And so the inlets got longer, the aircraft got bigger, we needed more engines. Originally they envisioned this with only 2 engines, we required 4 engines to do it now. So the aircraft went from initial concept weight of around 75,000, 80,000 pounds to a gross takeoff weight of 125,000 pounds. Not insignificant, especially when we're talking about development costs now. So this concept on the bottom, which is B5, B3, is where we ended up at the end of phase 2. A much larger aircraft. Instead of an F-15 now, we're talking about an SR-71. So this is the size difference that we ended up having to deal with. And if you look at it, it kind of looks like an SR-71. The wing platform is still a Mach 3 aircraft, not meant for sustained Mach free flight, but Mach 3 flight nonetheless. So the inlets still have to manage the air coming in at those speeds, and then condition it using MIPIC before it hits the engine. And this was the reason for the increase in length. So the aircraft weight grew by 10,000 kilograms. So this became a real serious problem for us because now our estimate of what it would take to develop this, instead of being $90 million, turned out to be over $200 million. So the program cost doubled. And the government doesn't like that very much. Now, this wasn't anything we did wrong. This is just the result of the actual work and doing the research and doing the testing and figuring out what's real and how this is actually going to come together. Programs like this grow all the time. Weight of aircraft grows all the time. You can't, if you're doing something like a new airliner, where you've done it before in the same way and it's not all that different from what you're doing previously, you can manage that weight growth much, much better. But if you're doing an aircraft that is really unique, something that's never been done before, the margin of error goes way up. And the government really didn't take this into account when they started to lay out the budget for this. So this is what we're facing at this point. So now we're thinking the government's not going to want to continue. And what do we do now if the government doesn't want to continue with the program? This is such a big program for a company like us to manage that we couldn't do anything else. Once we won phase 2, we couldn't do any other contracts. This was the only thing we were doing. And we knew it was a risk, but we also couldn't turn away the opportunity. So we threw all in. We bet the company on this contract. So there was one potential area of salvation. The government was still worried about us being able to execute phase 3, which is actual detailed design of the building of the system. So they wanted us to partner with another company that actually had more experience in doing these kinds of systems. So we had a meeting with a company that was based in San Diego called Titan Corporation. They're a government contractor that works in a number of different areas of technology development, UAVs, launch systems. They even do, sort of private security for the military as well. And we pitched them the program, told them about the company, what we were trying to do, asked if they were interested in partnering with us, and their response was, "We'll buy you instead. How about that?" And we're like, "Okay, that sounds interesting." I mean, for us, it seemed like a great outcome. I mean, we were worried about our ability to manage the program anyway. The government was also concerned about that. And, the contract itself was still worth $200 million. If we were awarded, and some company was going to get this contract and get a fee on top of that, and potentially other work down the road. And so what this company did, all they did was government contracting. So what happened is we ended up going into negotiations with them over an acquisition. We spent 3 or 4 months going back and forth, and them trying to agree on a price and so forth. And we were sort of like the 11th hour, they decided to pull out of the negotiations. We were so close. I mean, we had spent all this time working with them, and at the end of the day, they decided they just didn't want to do it. And there was a lot of reasons why. One of the reasons we found out later was they were embroiled in a sort of a controversy. At the time, the Iraq War was going on, and they were providing security at Abu Ghraib prison. I don't know if anyone remembers what happened at Abu Ghraib, but they got dragged into that. So now they're facing their own crisis, and they got no time for this. So that was a big thing that led to the end of the negotiations. So they didn't make the acquisition, and as you might think, the government decided not to go on to phase 3. They decided to close the contract, to end the program at phase 2 because of the cost of the program. It was that, and also DARPA was not able to find a service branch willing to take the program. DARPA doesn't develop these things on their own. They develop technologies for the armed forces. So whether it be the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, they need someone to take ownership of this program at some point, and no one wanted it. We thought the Air Force would be the optimal service branch for this, and we made plenty of pitches of them to take ownership of the program. They just didn't want it. At the time, they just didn't see any value in small satellites, and they didn't want to invest time or effort or take ownership of a small launch vehicle. So without a service branch stepping up to take ownership, and with the program price doubling, the government said, all right, we'll stop here, which meant pretty much the end for us. And so, as I mentioned, the cost of the program doubled. It doubled due to the size, due to the technologies that were developed, specifically MIPIC. And at the end of 2004, they ended the program at phase 2. And after that, we had conversations about trying to get additional government contracts, trying to revive the company, continue on doing this kind of work. But at the end of the day, my partner and I were we'd had enough. It was a good experience. We learned a lot, and we're still applying that experience today. But we felt it was time to go on and do something different. And we had, we weren't insolvent. We had money in the bank, so we laid off everyone, gave everyone handsome, separate, bonuses at the end, helped everyone find jobs, and we still had a little bit of money left over for ourselves at the end. We closed everything cleanly. We did that on our terms. We didn't want to, run the clock and try and keep things going and run out of money and have to go bankrupt. So for us, it was a better choice. And I look back at it now and still think we made the right decision. But for us too, it was an invaluable experience. That was 5 years. We went from working out of our living rooms with credit card debt to a $90 million government program, and learned a hell of a lot along the way. Better than any MBA program ever, in my view. Money well spent for us. But as I mentioned, there's a lot of lessons learned that came out of this process. So that's something that I think some of these are, again, you'll see are, pretty obvious, but maybe some of them aren't. A key for us is, a key for anyone who's running a company, whether it be tech or anything, is understand your market. For us at the beginning, we didn't really fully understand it. We kind of saw the potential, but there's a big difference between trying to address an existing market and trying to sell someone on an aspirational market. The small satellite market then was aspirational. A lot of good technology, a lot of people saying you could use small satellites for all kinds of applications, but there was no launch system to launch them, and the markets weren't fully developed where those satellites could be used appropriately. So it was still too early. Now, part of watching what's going on now in the small satellite world is that where the small satellite market is today is where we thought it was 15 years ago. If we had done Rascal now instead of 15 years ago, I think it would be a completely different story. This is where timing comes into it as well. Sometimes the timing is just off with these things. The other thing that we need to keep in mind is you need to balance capital requirements with risk. When you're going out to an investor, you can't have a situation where you need significant capital and the risk is extremely high. It's a bad combination. So you need to find situations where either your capital requirements, you have a lot of risk, but your capital requirements aren't all that high, so people are willing to place that bet. Or if you need a lot of capital, you need to have more assurance that that money is not going to go to waste. And that was something we learned as well. At the beginning, when we first started, we were asking for $25 million for an aspirational market that had tremendous risk. Not only was the market not mature, but we were a new company with 2 guys and an idea, essentially. That doesn't balance out. And also, decide, too, what is in your interest as a small business owner. The government is a great customer. The government never runs out of money, essentially. So there's all kinds of government contracts that you can get to start a business, to sustain a business. But it's not the same as being able to work in the commercial markets. For us, the government is reliable, but you don't have as much freedom. Commercial is not as reliable, but you have more freedom to do exactly what you want. So trying to sort of figure out where to place yourself is really, really key. For aerospace, honestly, it's hard to do anything commercially unless you've got tons of money already. If you're an Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, you bring your own money to the table, you can spend $100 million, you can get yourself an aerospace company. For guys like me and for you, it's not so simple. So maybe you start small, not trying to do launch systems, but do technology development. That's not a bad path. The other thing we learned that was really critical is to, if you see a problem, fix a problem. We saw all kinds of issues with people and personnel that we took too long to solve. For whatever reason, either we were nervous, we didn't trust ourselves, people were giving us bad advice. If we had fired that program manager that we hired before he met our customer, we wouldn't have had all the problems that we had. We knew we should have fired him. We should have done it 2 months earlier as opposed to waiting until when we did it. So it's really key. When you see that something going wrong, don't wait. Fix it right away and then move on. And it's okay to have doubts, but trust your instincts. We learned that at the same time. At multiple steps along the way, I felt we were making the wrong decision. We were listening to the wrong people. We were not going with our guts. You have to have data. You want to rely on data, but sometimes you don't have that luxury. You have to make a decision. You have to make it based on your own instincts. Trust your instincts. Do it. If you make a mistake and you can own it, that's fine. If you make a mistake based on someone else's recommendation, that's your fault too. At the time, we had people working for us that were, 10 years our senior, who had much more experience. We thought, these people know what they're talking about. We'll just listen to them. No. Turned out we were right, and we should have listened to ourselves. That was a hard lesson to learn, but now I think I'm in a much better place because of it. So those are the lessons, and hopefully something I've said here will be useful to somebody. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
at the beginning you were trying to make people invest in something that's high risk and high cost. Do you think it would have been more beneficial to like divide what you're trying to reach to separate stages, such as I don't know, just instead of developing both the airplane and the rocket, say airplane in one and then rocket in one, and then only pitching one to your investors.
Well, the problem is you still have to find a way to generate revenue at some point. So you can do that like we did. We started with our first government contract developing a little piece. To do that commercially is much more difficult because if you develop a piece of your system, you can't generate revenue with it. You can't address the market with it. So you have to have a complete product or you don't have anything. So I mean, if you can, in this sense, develop a piece on its own that can self be a product, then yes, that's obviously a much better way to do it. With a launch system, it's not so simple. But, which is why, again, I don't recommend necessarily trying to start a launch vehicle company. Not necessarily the smartest thing to do. But fun.
So there's a lot of shakeups in the hardware startup space lately, kind of across the board from commercial to industrial. You obviously went the route of an incredible amount of non-dilutive government funding. How do you feel that, like, there's clearly pitfalls and pains from that versus the issues with getting kind of more venture or angel style funding, which you went to bat with that and just couldn't get any bites. How do you feel about synthesizing those two paths for a hardware-based kind of startup company? Is there any advice on like what you think the key pain points are for picking one versus the other?
That's a good question. It's not so simple. I know it's possible, and if you can make it work, it's not a bad way to do it. I mean, I'm trying to think of one example where someone's trying to do that now. It's not exactly government commercial, but a friend of mine, a good friend of mine, started a company called Planetary Resources. Are you familiar? Yeah, asteroid mining.
Yep.
And this is far out.
Yep.
This is not something that's going to happen in the next 5 years. So how do you raise money for a company that has a business plan with a 30-year horizon? So their approach was to go the government contracting route. The government is interested in some of the same technologies that you can use in asteroid mining that you can use to spy on other satellites in orbit or do in-orbit servicing, for that matter. Yeah. So what their approach they're taking now is they still have their eyes set on the goal of asteroid mining, but they're going to develop satellites in the interim that can do in-orbit services, things like that actually have a market for the government and for the commercial world as well. So if you can do that, that's obviously the best way to do anything like this, especially if you're talking about something with really large capital requirements that have a really long time horizon. They're doing it the right way. They just raised I think like $20 million actually. $25 million.
Well, and I've seen some of they do a good job of selling them, right? They're talking about that asteroid that's got 3 times the global supply of platinum or whatever in it.
Right. Yeah.
So
no, I mean,
the rewards are clear. It's just that getting there is a long haul.
It is a long haul, but they managed to start off. I mean, I think they have the right strategy now. And it doesn't hurt that you bring in the right people. You have a good team, and they are very slick. They know what they're doing. They can sell. That's a big part of it as well. You have to be able to sell your ideas. Part of that is believing in yourself, but it's also bringing in good people around you.
After your first government contract, did you just stop trying to get private contracts altogether, or just stopped altogether? I guess.
Yeah, on the commercial side. Yeah. There was no point then to try and even go into the commercial markets for money. We knew at that point that if we were going to be successful, we were going to grow, it was going to be on the back of government contracts. So, but government contracting takes a lot of effort. I mean, there's a ramp-up period. I mean, once you're in the system and people know you, and you've done at least 1 or 2, and for certain agencies, you can get more easily. That first one is really, really tough. Because you have to, the way you manage a government contract is different than the way you even run a normal startup. And there's certain accounting, reporting requirements, so there's a whole structure that you put in place to manage a contract and report everything to the government. And so you have to, know what you're doing. So it was a full-time effort. And we needed to get one contract, you have to submit proposals for 10 or 20. So it's a lot of writing. But once you get that first one, especially if it's for an agency like DARPA, then you're doing okay. You can make that work.
What do you do after closing up shop?
Well, I went to work for, actually, I stayed in aerospace for a little while. I spent a year working for another good friend of mine in a company called Space Adventures, which I don't know if anyone, you know.
I was out in the rocket site after, so
Oh,
I
yeah.
kind of 10 years after you, I kind of go through the Mojave Spaceport with
Oh, so
all the
you know.
government cronies, and
Yeah.
we could see the scale. The scale composite's still running around there doing some stuff here
Oh,
and
yeah.
there until they. And there are a variety of opinions about Burt Rutan. So many of them are epic, and some of them are, does he really deliver?
Bert is
He's an interesting character. There's a lot of respect for what he's done, but
there was respect because he did deliver.
Yeah.
And he was one of the most fascinating people I've ever worked with. I mean, he's opinionated and he can be brusque and he can be, he is who he is. He's got great confidence in his abilities, but there's a reason why. And he pulled off some amazing feats in terms of aircraft development. So it was a pleasure to work for him. But that whole community is really small. So my friend who did Space Adventures, his name was Eric Anderson. When he closed up shop, he's like, "Why don't you come work for me for a while?" He wanted to, there was still a lot of interest in suborbital space tourism at that point, and they were doing something with the Russians. They were trying to develop a suborbital space vehicle. He needs someone to manage that. I'm like, okay, it sounded interesting. Why not? So I spent a year working with him, trying to see if there was a business case for suborbital space tourism, and we determined there wasn't. So I left after a year. And since then, I've been mostly doing consulting. Started a couple of companies in the interim, not in aerospace. And most of the consulting I do is more technical and strategy consulting these days. And I'm still working on a new venture now. Again, not in aerospace. But I am doing aerospace-related work now, too. The consulting work I'm doing is mostly technical in aerospace, advising people on how to build. Actually, been doing some work. I don't know if anyone saw the news about the Saudi investment in Virgin. Been working on that also the last 8 months. So a lot of interesting things going on now. The market, small satellite market, seems like it's real this time, not a bubble. A lot of investment, private investment going into space. So
I know a lot of people that are currently trying to build small satellites for.
Yeah, but now it really seems like this is the real deal. The technology and the markets have matured to the point where I think this is not something that's going to be an illusion. There's a lot of signs. So I mean, to be in aerospace today, it's good timing. In 2000, not so much. But if you're coming out and you're looking for work in that field, now is a good time to be an aerospace engineer or entrepreneur in aerospace, actually.
Well, let's thank South.